Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? Mike Triplett broke ESPN.com today. How are you, man?
Good. How are you doing, Matt?
Very well. So is this the most read article that you've ever done in your career?
No. I don't know the numbers for sure, but I don't think it's. I do think locally, obviously, it's of great interest. I don't know if it, it didn't lead the page on the NFL page or anything. And look, I think the story, I actually became aware of these numbers last year and was kind of feeling out the Saints in the NFL to be like, well, is anybody looking into this? Are there any formal complaints over this? Is there any, and then we did the research with the numbers, and there were some other teams that had finished last 2 years in a row, that had finished bottom 3 or bottom 5 3 years in a row, and I was kind of like, I guess it's eye-opening, but it's not, impossible. And then when they finished last again this year, it was like, oh my, this is just impossible to ignore. So, I mean, it's mostly laying the numbers out there, pointing out how rare it is, and there's no accusations in the story. I think something like this would be almost too hard to orchestrate if it was really like an agenda. But at the very least, it adds to that pile of everything from this season that the Saints were up against, that they had to overcome: hurricane evacuations, COVID injuries, and this wild penalty disparity.
Okay, for those just joining who haven't seen the article yet, Mike has a piece at ESPN.com. The headline reads, "No calls haunt the New Orleans Saints. Numbers suggest it's worse than one playoff call." Essentially, the Saints have been, their opponents have been the least penalized of any team in the NFL each of the last 4 seasons.
Right. Well, they've been in the bottom 3 each of the last 4 seasons.
Okay.
It was 30th, 31st, 32nd, and tied for 31st. So almost impossible. And look, I was actually surprised how many similar examples there were. No other team had ever finished even bottom 3 years in a row, dating back to 2001. There were some that Elias Sports Bureau had dug up, 70s, 80s, where it happened 3 years in a row. There's only one example of it ever happening 4 years in a row, to the Packers, 70-73 on accepted penalties, because they didn't have the total called penalty data. But even from 2013 to 2017, on the flip side, the Cardinals finished top 3, like the fewest opponent, the most flags called against their opponents 4 years in a row. They were top 3. So weird things have happened like this, but I mean, just natural assumption in your brain is it should be random, and a perfect example of what random looks like. This is maybe the most shocking detail in the entire story. The Buccaneers tied the Saints for last this year. Tom Brady got the fewest calls against him of any quarterback in the league this year. But the Buccaneers, they finished 31st this year. Last year they finished 3rd. The year before that they were 28th. The year before that they were 3rd. I mean, it was all over the map, because there should be no rhyme or reason to whether your opponents are committing penalties against you. It's a different crew. It's a different team in every game.
So to what do you attribute this disparity that's gone against New Orleans for almost half decade?
I really don't know. I mean, naturally, that you could attribute a conspiracy theory to it, or
yes,
the refs don't like the Saints, or the refs don't like Sean Payton. But I mean, that's too hard for me. One of the people I spoke to is John Perry, who was Super Bowl referee, a referee for 19 years, an official for 19 years, worked Saints game almost every one of those 19 years, and he's now the ESPN officiating analyst. And he said, listen, we officiate every play as he called it its own 6-second universe. He's like, we all have, 5 assignments. We're staring at that play. We don't look at, what team it is or even what player it is. We see uniforms and numbers and we get graded on whether we get the call right or not. So to think that, hundreds of officials have all agreed to officiate the Saints one way would be quite a leap. But maybe they're not getting the benefit of the doubt. Maybe, who knows? Who knows? But one thing I thought I might see that I did not see was that the Saints are a good team. And one person theorized to me, you'd think teams commit more penalties against good teams because they're desperate or they're playing catch up or but that was not true. Good teams, bad teams, it almost really didn't matter. The number 3 team and a team that has finished bottom 10 in each of the last 5 years is the Green Bay Packers. They're not nearly in the same boat as the Saints, but they're third from the bottom in getting penalties to go their way or opponents' penalties called, and they've been one of the other best teams in the league over the last 5 years.
Mike Triplett's with us, ESPN.com. You do also point out at the end of the piece about Sean Payton leaving the competition committee. Can you elaborate on what significance that has?
I don't know. I mean, I mentioned it as a detail, but Payton never explained it, and I never got an explanation on why Payton left the competition committee. But, he suggested it's some form of unhappiness with the league or with rules or with how things are done, because he goes, it was just time for me to move on. I'm going to leave it at that so I don't get fined. And look, I mean, we know that Sean Payton has expressed his disappointment with certain rules, with certain rule interpretations. Obviously, the pass interference call and how that was officiated. He actually brought that up, I think, when people were talking about the taunting rule. He's not a big fan of the taunting rule. He did not like the one-person replay booth in New York. He suggested that should be maybe 3 people conferring and coming to some judgment together. He's been a big advocate, as have I, for the concept of a sky judge like you see in college.
Yep.
Calling those down to the field quickly, which we're actually seeing sort of informally implemented in the NFL. But, he has strong ideas about how number one, I skipped the number one. He has said for years that he can't believe officials aren't full-time, working full-time and training and learning and working on their craft, as opposed to it being sort of a part-time gig for them.
That's perplexing to basically everyone who watches football and knows that that's the reality. But it's also why officials are bad at their job. All of them are. That's my contention anyway, Mike. He's on Twitter at Mike Triplett. Before you go, 2 things. Number one, I'm sure I know you saw it. It was at ESPN.com. The suggestion that Sean Payton might leave for a TV gig. You have a reaction to that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I've heard that floated, and am prepared and digging to see where we're at with that. But no, nothing concretely that I've been able to report.
Well, let me ask. I wasn't asking for a report. What would be your reaction? Do you think that would even be something that should be entertained as an idea?
That should even be entertained by what?
Just as an idea, is it something we should even entertain? The idea that Sean Payton could leave the Saints to go join a TV network this year. If that happened, what would be your reaction?
I mean, I will never be shocked if he decides to leave the game because of the amount of years he's been here, the amount of years he's been doing it at such a high level, the stress that this season took. So, that wouldn't shock me as much as seeing, like a third-year coach walk away from the game. But, we've seen so many things that haven't come to fruition. And even a few years ago when Sean Payton very much looked into the possibility of coaching elsewhere and took some time to explore other opportunities before deciding to stay with the Saints, it's not impossible. I would never say, oh, no, that there's no way that could ever happen. I wouldn't say that, no.
All right, last thing. A lot of mock drafts have the Saints taking Kenny Pickett, including Mel Kiper's at ESPN.com. How would you feel about the Saints taking the quarterback from Pittsburgh?
If the Saints take a quarterback in round 1, I will believe they have real conviction on that pick, because they have resisted the urge to take a quarterback for so long. They have never forced it. Even when Drew Brees was 38, 39, and 40 and 41, they've resisted the urge. They've never They've never desperately been like, we need a quarterback, so we're going to just take a quarterback. But the problem is, this is the hardest year to predict that it'll happen because they pick 18th. Most analysts say that there's not a lot of great quarterback talent in this draft. So if one or two guys really have a good stretch from the Senior Bowl to private workouts to the combine, they'll probably go in the top 5. So the idea of the Saints falling in love with a quarterback in this year's draft class and him being within their reach at 18, I think that would take a perfect storm. But obviously, it's their number one need. So if they can find one they like, it'd be great if they did.
Well, I told you last week I wasn't going to bother you anymore, and we didn't even make it a week. So I'd like to tell you,
right. We are far from having put this season to bed yet.
I know, but when things do persist, we'll call again. We always appreciate you making time for us, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.